Henry, a 74-year-old widower, faces the most painful moment of his life when his daughter Rebecca cruelly rejects a handmade gift during a Sunday family dinner. What should have been a gesture of love and reconciliation turns into public humiliation in front of his grandchildren. But that very night, an unexpected discovery will change everything between father and daughter, revealing secrets buried for decades and forcing them both to confront truths that could either destroy or heal a broken family. I never thought a wooden jewelry box could break my heart into so many pieces. But there I was, 74 years old, watching my only daughter throw away 3 months of my work like it was garbage. Let me start from the moment everything went wrong. It was Sunday, October 15th, and Rebecca had invited me to dinner at her house in suburban Denver. These dinners had become our monthly ritual ever since Martha passed away 2 years ago. My wife always said family dinners were sacred, and I'd been trying to honor that tradition, even though things between Rebecca and me had grown colder than a Colorado winter. I pulled into her driveway at exactly 5:30, the jewelry box wrapped in brown paper sitting on my passenger seat. My hands were shaking, not from my arthritis this time, but from nerves. I'd spent every evening for the past 3 months in my garage workshop, carefully carving each detail, sanding every surface until it was smooth as silk. It was made from cherry wood, with tiny roses etched into the lid, the same roses Martha used to grow in our backyard, the ones Rebecca loved as a little girl. The front door opened before I could even knock. Rebecca stood there in her pristine white blouse and dark slacks, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. At 42, she'd inherited her mother's sharp features, but none of her warmth. "Hi, Dad," she said, stepping aside to let me in. No hug, no smile. Just that polite distance she'd mastered over the years. "Evening, sweetheart." I held up the wrapped box. "I brought something for you." Her eyes flickered to the package, then away. "You didn't need to do that." But I did need to. God, I needed to more than she could ever understand. The house smelled like roast beef and disappointment. Rebecca's husband, David, was in the living room watching football with their 2 kids, Emma, 12, and Jake, 10. They barely looked up when I walked in. "Hey, Grandpa Henry," Emma mumbled, not taking her eyes off her phone. "Hi there, sunshine," I said, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. "How's school going?" "Fine," she replied, already lost in whatever was on her screen. Jake didn't even acknowledge me. These kids barely knew me, and whose fault was that? Mine, probably. I'd been so buried in my grief after Martha died that I'd let the distance grow like weeds between us. David stood up and shook my hand. Firm grip, genuine smile. He was a good man, even if he'd learned to stay neutral in whatever war was being fought between his wife and me. "How you doing, Henry?" "Keeping busy." "Oh, puttering around the workshop mostly." I glanced toward the kitchen where Rebecca was setting the table with military precision, trying to stay useful. Dinner was served with the efficiency of a restaurant and about as much warmth. Rebecca had made pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, all Martha's recipes, but somehow they tasted different. Maybe food tastes different when it's made out of obligation instead of love. We made small talk about the weather, David's job at the engineering firm, the kids' activities. I told them about my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson's cat, getting stuck in my tree, trying to get a laugh. Emma cracked a smile. It felt like a victory. Halfway through the meal, I couldn't wait anymore. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "Rebecca, honey," I said, reaching for the wrapped box I'd placed beside my chair. "I made this for you." The conversation died. David stopped chewing. The kids looked up from their plates. Rebecca's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Dad, I told you. I know what you told me, but please just look at it." My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I think you'll like it." She set down her fork with a sigh that could have frozen hell over. I handed her the package with hands that were definitely shaking now. She unwrapped it slowly, deliberately, like she was defusing a bomb. When the brown paper fell away and revealed the jewelry box, I held my breath. I'd carved those roses with more care than a surgeon performs heart surgery. The wood gleamed under her dining room lights, every surface perfect, every joint seamless. It was the finest work I'd ever done. Rebecca stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at me with eyes so cold, I felt frostbite in my soul. "What is this supposed to be?" It's a jewelry box. I made it for you. Those are your mother's roses, the ones you used to..." "I remember the roses, Dad." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "What I don't understand is why you think I need this." The room felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of it. David was staring at his plate. The kids had gone completely silent, sensing the tension like animals before a storm. I thought you might like something handmade, something with meaning. Rebecca stood up abruptly, the jewelry box in her hands. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something kind, something that would bridge the gap between us. Instead, she walked to the kitchen trash can and dropped it in. The sound it made hitting the bottom of that can was the sound of my heart breaking. Not cracking, not bending, breaking, clean through like a bone snapping under too much pressure. "Rebecca," David's voice was sharp with shock. "What the hell? Don't," she said, not turning around. "Just don't." I sat there staring at that trash can like it had swallowed my entire reason for existing. 3 months of work, 3 months of hope, 3 months of trying to find some way back to my daughter's heart, thrown away like yesterday's newspaper. Emma was the first to break the silence. "Mum, that was really mean." "Emma, go to your room," Rebecca said, her back still to all of us. "But Mum, now." Both kids scrambled away from the table, Jake shooting me a look that was equal parts confusion and sympathy. David stood up, his face red with anger I'd never seen before. "Rebecca, what is wrong with you? Your father spent months making that for you." She finally turned around, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. It wasn't just anger or coldness. It was something darker, deeper, something that had been festering for years. "You want to know what's wrong with me?" Her voice was getting louder. "My father thinks he can buy forgiveness with a piece of wood. He thinks he can make up for 30 years of being absent with a fucking jewelry box." I flinched at the profanity. Rebecca rarely swore, especially not in front of the kids. "Sweetheart, I don't know what—" "Don't call me sweetheart." The words exploded out of her. "You lost that right a long time ago." My mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I wanted to ask what I'd done wrong, wanted to understand where all this rage was coming from, but the words wouldn't come. David stepped between us. "Okay, that's enough. Henry, maybe you should go. We need to cool down here." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I stood up on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, someone much older and more fragile than I'd felt that morning. "I'm sorry," I managed to whisper, though I wasn't even sure what I was apologizing for. "I'm so sorry." Rebecca had turned away again, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She didn't say goodbye. I walked to my car in a daze, got behind the wheel and sat there for 10 minutes before I could even start the engine. Through the kitchen window, I could see David and Rebecca arguing, their shadows moving behind the curtains like players in some tragic puppet show. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and stop signs that all looked the same. I kept thinking about the sound that jewelry box made when it hit the trash. Such a small sound to represent the complete destruction of what little relationship my daughter and I had left. Back home, I sat in my empty living room, staring at the chair where Martha used to knit, while we watched the evening news together. The house felt bigger somehow, like Rebecca's rejection had physically expanded the spaces between everything. I thought about calling her, thought about going back to demand an explanation, thought about 1,000 different things I could have said or done differently, but mostly I just sat there feeling like the loneliest man in Colorado, maybe in the whole world. The clock on the mantel ticked past 9, then 10. I should have gone to bed, but sleep felt impossible. How do you sleep when your heart is lying in pieces in your daughter's trash can? At 10:30, my phone rang. The phone's ring cut through my misery like a fire alarm. I stared at it for 3 rings, wondering if I had the strength to talk to anyone, especially if it was Rebecca calling to twist the knife deeper into my already bleeding heart. But it wasn't Rebecca's name on the caller ID. It was David's. "Hello?" My voice came out like sandpaper on wood. "Henry, it's David. Listen, I need you to come back over here, right now." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. "Is everything okay? Are the kids—" "The kids are fine. She's locked herself in the bedroom and won't come out. She's been crying for the past 2 hours and I think there's something you need to know." I was already reaching for my jacket. "What kind of something?" "Not over the phone, just come, please." The drive back to Rebecca's house felt like traveling through a different universe than the one I'd left 2 hours earlier. The same streetlights, the same route, but everything had shifted somehow. David's voice had carried a weight I'd never heard before, like he was holding back something enormous. David met me at the front door before I could knock. His hair was disheveled, his face drawn with exhaustion. He looked like a man who'd been wrestling with demons and losing. "Thank God you're here," he said, ushering me inside quickly. "The kids are asleep. Rebecca's still upstairs." We stood in his living room, the same room where just hours earlier I'd tried to make small talk about cats and weather. Now it felt like a crime scene. "David, what's going on? I need to understand why she reacted that way. I've been trying to figure out what I did wrong, but I can't." "It's not what you did, Henry." It's what you didn't know. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as something he did when he was stressed beyond measure. Sit down, please. I lowered myself onto their couch, the same couch where my grandchildren had barely acknowledged my existence just hours earlier. David sat across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees like he was praying. How much do you know about Rebecca's childhood? I mean, really know? The question caught me off guard. I know everything about her childhood. I was there for most of it. Martha and I, were you though? David's interruption was gentle but firm. Were you really there, Henry? I felt defensive anger rising in my chest. Of course I was there. I worked hard to provide for my family, but I was there for the important things. School plays, birthdays, Christmas mornings. What about the summer she turned 14? The question hit me like a physical blow. The summer Rebecca turned 14. I tried to reach back into my memory, but it was like grasping at smoke. That was 1995. I'd been working double shifts at the manufacturing plant, trying to save money for Rebecca's college fund. I was working a lot that summer. The plant was behind on orders, and the overtime pay was too good to pass up. 60 hours a week, Rebecca told me. Sometimes 70. The numbers felt like accusations. I was providing for my family. That's what fathers do. I'm not judging you, Henry. I'm a father too. I understand the pressure to provide. David's voice was carefully controlled. But do you know what happened to Rebecca that summer while you were working those 60-hour weeks? A cold dread was spreading through my chest like ice water in my veins. What do you mean, what happened? David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with something that looked like grief. Your neighbor's son, Tommy Richardson. He was 16. Tommy Richardson. The name brought back a vague memory of a skinny kid with dark hair who lived 3 houses down. His parents, Bob and Linda Richardson, were nice people. We'd had barbecues together a few times, shared a beer over the fence while our wives gossiped. What about Tommy? He used to come over when you and Martha were both at work. Rebecca was home alone most days that summer, remember? Martha had taken that part-time job at the bank. Yes, I remembered. Martha's first job in 15 years. She'd been so excited, so proud to be contributing financially. I'd encouraged her to take it. Tommy would come over, and at first, Rebecca said it was nice to have company. He was older, charming, made her feel special, grown up. You know how 14-year-old girls can be. I knew, but I didn't want to know where this story was going. My hands were starting to shake again. Henry, he hurt her for most of that summer. And she never told anyone because she was scared, ashamed, and because what? The words barely made it out of my throat. Because she tried to tell Martha once, and Martha didn't believe her. Said Rebecca was just trying to get attention because you were working so much. The room started spinning. Martha, my sweet, loving Martha, had dismissed our daughter's cry for help, had failed to protect her when she needed it most. That's not possible. Martha was overwhelmed too, Henry. Working her first job in years, managing the house alone, dealing with a teenage daughter who was becoming more withdrawn by the day. When Rebecca finally worked up the courage to say something, Martha was exhausted and stressed, and she misread the situation completely. I felt like I was drowning in dry air. Why didn't Rebecca tell me? Because you were never home. And when you were home, you were tired, distracted, focused on work problems or house repairs or anything, except really seeing your daughter. David's voice was getting harder now, less gentle. And because after Martha dismissed her, Rebecca figured if her own mother didn't believe her, why would her father, who was barely around? The memories were coming back now in horrible clarity. That summer, Rebecca had changed. She'd become quieter, more withdrawn. She'd stopped wanting to go to the community pool, stopped hanging out with her friends. I'd noticed, but I'd chalked it up to typical teenage moodiness. How long? I whispered. 3 months. From June until September, when school started and she wasn't home alone anymore. 3 months. While I'd been working overtime to secure our financial future, some 16-year-old monster had been destroying my daughter's innocence in my own house. While Martha had been discovering her independence at her new job, our child had been suffering alone. Why are you telling me this now? David stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness of his backyard. Because today, when you gave her that jewelry box, all she could think about was how you'd spent 3 months making her something beautiful, while ignoring 3 months of her suffering 28 years ago. The parallel was like a knife twisting in my chest. 3 months of careful, loving work on a jewelry box. 3 months of careful, systematic abuse that I'd been too busy to notice. She sees that box as a symbol of everything she needed from you but never got. Attention, protection, presence. And when she looked at those roses you carved, all she could think about was the roses in your backyard where Tommy Richardson cornered her while you were at the plant earning overtime pay. I buried my face in my hands. The roses, Jesus Christ, the roses. I'd thought I was honoring happy memories, but I'd been carving her nightmare into wood. David, I had no idea. How could I not know? How could I miss something that big happening to my own child? Because you were a good provider and a mediocre father. The words were brutal in their honesty. And because Rebecca got very, very good at hiding pain. Upstairs, I heard a door open and close, footsteps in the hallway. We both looked up at the ceiling. She's been carrying this alone for almost 30 years, David continued. It's affected everything. Her ability to trust, to open up, to accept love from anyone, including me and the kids. She's been in therapy for 5 years, working through it. 5 years. Another failure. My daughter had been fighting this battle for 5 years, and I'd known nothing about it. She didn't want to tell you because she was afraid you'd blame Martha or blame yourself. And she was right. Look at you right now. I was falling apart, and we both knew it. But David wasn't done. There's more, Henry. Something else happened tonight after you left. If this part also touched your heart, tell me from which place in the world you're listening to this story. Sometimes the hardest truths come to light in the darkest moments, and I need to know I'm not carrying these words alone. I looked up at him, not sure I could handle anything more. After she threw away the jewelry box, after she sent you away, she went to take it out to the garage trash can. She said she didn't want the kids to see it in the kitchen trash and ask questions. Okay. I waited for the other shoe to drop. When she picked it up, the lid opened, and she saw what was inside. The silence stretched between David and me like a taut wire ready to snap. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, and somewhere upstairs, the soft sound of Rebecca moving around in her bedroom. What was inside the box? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. This night had already shattered everything I thought I understood about my family, about my daughter, about myself. David walked back to the couch and sat down heavily, like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Why don't you tell me what you put in there, Henry? My mind went blank for a moment. What did I put inside? I'd been so focused on the craftsmanship, on making the exterior perfect, that the content seemed almost secondary. But then, slowly, the memory came back. Letters, I whispered. I put letters inside. What kind of letters? The shame hit me like a physical blow. In my grief-stricken state after Martha's death, in my desperate attempt to reconnect with Rebecca, I'd done something I thought was romantic and meaningful. Now it felt like another violation. Love letters, the ones I wrote to Martha when we were dating, and some I wrote to her after she died. David nodded slowly. Rebecca found 17 letters in that box. Letters you wrote to her mother spanning from 1970 to 2023. I had put them there thinking it would show Rebecca how much love could exist in a family, how much her parents had cherished each other and, by extension, cherished her. I thought it would be a bridge between us, a way to show her the foundation of love that had created her. Instead, I'd handed her evidence of everything she'd never had. She spent 2 hours reading every single one, David continued. Letters about weekend trips you and Martha took while she was at sleepovers. Letters about quiet evenings together while she was upstairs doing homework alone. Letters about how grateful you were for Martha's support during difficult times at work. Support Rebecca was never offered when she was going through her own difficult times. Each word felt like a hammer blow to my chest. David, I know you didn't mean to hurt her, but Henry, do you understand what those letters represent to her? They're a 43-year chronicle of a love story she was never really part of. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. The magnitude of my failure was becoming clearer with every passing moment. There was one letter in particular, David said, his voice getting softer. One you wrote to Martha in July of 1995. July 1995, the heart of that terrible summer I'd been too busy to notice. You wrote about how peaceful the house was with just you and Martha there in the evenings, how nice it was to have quiet dinners together after long days at work, how you were looking forward to Rebecca going to summer camp the next year, so you and Martha could have even more time alone together. The letter came back to me in vivid, horrible detail. I remembered writing it during a rare lunch break at the plant, overwhelmed with love for my wife and grateful for the calm of our temporarily empty nest. Rebecca had been so quiet that summer, spending most of her time in her room or the backyard. I'd seen it as a blessing, a well-behaved teenager who didn't cause drama or demand constant attention. I'd been celebrating my daughter's withdrawal while she was being systematically abused. She read that letter while sitting on her bedroom floor, David said, and she realized that during the worst period of her life, her father was writing love poems about how glad he was she wasn't around. "Oh God," the words came out as barely a whisper. "Oh God, David, I didn't know. How could I have known?" "That's the problem, Henry. You didn't want to know. It was easier to work overtime, easier to focus on providing financially, easier to believe everything was fine than to actually pay attention to your 14-year-old daughter who was crying herself to sleep every night." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to defend myself, wanted to explain that I'd been doing what I thought was best for my family, that I'd been following the model my own father had set, but the words felt hollow before they even reached my lips. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Still upstairs. She asked me to call you because she said—" David paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "She said she owes you an explanation, but she can't face giving it to you directly. Not yet." I looked toward the staircase, imagining my daughter up there, probably sitting on the edge of her bed with tear-stained cheeks, surrounded by letters that had reopened wounds I'd never even known existed. "There's something else," David said. "Something she wanted me to tell you." I braced myself for another revelation, another piece of evidence of my failures as a father. The jewelry box itself, the craftsmanship, the roses, the time you spent on it. She thinks it's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for her. The whiplash of emotions nearly knocked me over. What? She spent an hour just holding it after she finished reading the letters. She kept running her fingers over those roses, crying and saying how perfect they were. She said she could see every hour you spent on it, every careful cut, every gentle sanding. I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. Then why did she throw it away? Because it hurt too much. Because it represented everything she'd always wanted from you but never gotten. Because receiving something that beautiful and thoughtful now felt like being shown what could have been if you'd paid that kind of attention to her when she needed it most. The cruelty of the timing wasn't lost on me. I'd finally learned how to show love the way Rebecca needed it, but 30 years too late. "She wants to keep it," David said. "The box. She retrieved it from the trash after I went to check on the kids. It's upstairs with her now." A tiny spark of hope flickered in my chest. "She kept it?" "She kept it. But Henry, you need to understand, this isn't forgiveness. Not yet. This is her trying to figure out how to process 42 years of feeling like she came second to everything else in your life." Footsteps on the stairs made us both look up. Rebecca appeared in the doorway and I barely recognized her. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hair was disheveled, and she was clutching the jewelry box against her chest like a lifeline. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper. "I read the letter you wrote to Mom after she died, the one from last Christmas." I remembered that letter. I'd written it on Christmas Eve, sitting alone in our bedroom, overwhelmed by grief and loneliness. I'd poured my heart out onto paper, telling Martha about how lost I felt without her, how I didn't know how to connect with Rebecca, how I was afraid I'd failed as both a husband and a father. "You wrote that you wished you'd been a better father, that you regretted working so much when I was young, that you were sorry for all the moments you missed." She took a shaky breath, still standing in the doorway like she might bolt at any moment. "Did you mean it?" she asked. "Or was that just grief talking?" The question felt like the most important one I'd ever been asked in my 74 years of life. "I meant every word," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "Rebecca, I've spent the last 2 years realizing how much I missed, how many ways I failed you. I just never knew how deep that failure went." She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know you didn't know about Tommy Richardson. David told me he explained everything. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry I wasn't there to protect you. I needed you to be there," she said, her voice breaking. "I needed my dad and you were always somewhere else." The simple truth of it was devastating. "I can't change the past," I said. "God knows I would if I could. But Rebecca, I want to do better now. I want to learn how to be the father you deserved then and still deserve now." She was quiet for a long time, just standing there holding the jewelry box, looking like the 14-year-old girl who had needed me and found only empty spaces where I should have been. What comes next might surprise you. If you want to keep hearing stories like this, tap the subscribe button now. It's free, and you'll be with me through every moment of what happens next. "It's going to take time," she finally said. "A lot of time and probably therapy for both of us." I nodded eagerly. "Whatever it takes. And you have to understand, I can't just flip a switch and trust you. You have to earn that, every day." "I know." She looked down at the jewelry box in her hands. "But I want to try." For the first time in 28 years, I actually want to try. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange kind of limbo. Rebecca and I started texting each other, short, careful messages that felt like learning a new language. She'd send me pictures of the kids at soccer practice, and I'd respond with photos of projects in my workshop. We were building something fragile and new, like constructing a house of cards in a room full of fans. But the real breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when my phone rang at 7:30 a.m. Rebecca never called that early. "Dad?" Her voice was tight with panic. "I need your help." I was already reaching for my keys. "What's wrong?" "David's in the emergency room, heart palpitations. They think it might be stress-related, but they want to run tests. The kids, I can't leave them alone and I can't take them to the hospital. They're scared enough already. I'll be right there." The drive to Rebecca's house took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. I found her in the driveway, still in her pajamas and robe, pacing back and forth while talking on her phone to someone at the hospital. When she saw me, the relief on her face was so raw it nearly broke my heart. "Thank you," she said, ending her call. "I didn't know who else to call. I'm glad you called me." And I meant it. For the first time in years, my daughter had needed me and actually reached out. Inside, Emma and Jake were sitting at the kitchen table, still in their school clothes from the night before. They looked small and frightened, and I realized I'd never seen them without David's steady presence nearby. "Is Daddy going to be okay?" Emma asked, her voice tiny. I looked at Rebecca, unsure of what she'd already told them. She nodded slightly, giving me permission to answer. "The doctors are taking very good care of him," I said, settling into the chair between them. "Sometimes grown-ups get worried about things, and it makes their hearts beat too fast. The doctors just want to make sure everything's working right. Like when I get scared during movies and my heart pounds." Jake asked. "Exactly like that, buddy. Except grown-up worries are different from movie scares." Rebecca grabbed her purse and car keys. "I need to get to the hospital." "Dad, are you sure you're okay watching them? Emma has violin lessons at 4 and Jake has a dentist appointment at 2:30. We'll manage." I pulled out my phone to make notes. "Violin at 4, dentist at 2:30. Got it." She paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Their schedules are on the refrigerator. Emergency numbers are in the drawer by the phone. And Dad? Thank you. Really." After she left, I found myself alone with my grandchildren for the first time in their lives. The house felt different without David's easy laughter or Rebecca's efficient bustling. It was just me and 2 kids who barely knew me, facing a day full of unknowns. "Are you hungry?" I asked, surveying the breakfast dishes still on the counter. "Mom usually makes us smoothies," Emma said, "but I don't know how to work the blender." I studied the complicated-looking machine on the counter. It had more buttons than my television remote. "Well, let's figure it out together." What followed was 20 minutes of trial and error that resulted in smoothie on the ceiling, the counter, and somehow inside the toaster. But by the end of it, we had 2 purple drinks that were probably more banana than anything else, and the kids were giggling at my complete incompetence with modern kitchen appliances. "Grandpa, you're really bad at this," Jake announced, but he was smiling when he said it. "The worst," I agreed cheerfully. "Good thing your grandmother isn't here to see this disaster." Emma looked up from her smoothie. "Grandma Martha died before I was really old enough to remember her. Was she a good cook?" The question caught me off guard. We'd never talked about Martha before. Rebecca had always kept that part of our family history separate from her children's lives. "She was the best cook I ever knew," I said, settling back into my chair. "She made this apple pie that could make grown men weep with joy, and her chocolate chip cookies. I probably gained 20 pounds the first year we were married just from those cookies." "Tell us more about her," Emma said, and I realized these children had been missing an entire generation of stories. So I did. I told them about how Martha used to sing Broadway songs while she cooked Sunday dinner, how she once tried to teach me to dance in our kitchen, and we knocked over a whole pot of spaghetti sauce. I told them about the garden she kept, and how she used to let Rebecca help plant the roses every spring. "Is that why Mum got so upset about the jewelry box?" Emma asked, with the startling perceptiveness of children. "Because of the roses." I paused, unsure how much they knew or understood about that night. "Your mom has some complicated feelings about the past," I said carefully. "Sometimes when we're trying to do something nice, we accidentally remind people of things that hurt them." Jake frowned. "But you were trying to be nice." I was. "But sometimes trying isn't enough. Sometimes we have to understand what someone really needs, not just what we think they need." Emma nodded solemnly, like she was filing away this wisdom for future use. "Is that why you and Mum don't talk very much?" The direct question nearly knocked the wind out of me. "What makes you say that?" Dad told us once that you and Mom had some stuff to work out, and Mom always gets quiet when someone mentions you. I looked at these two kids, my grandchildren, who I barely knew but who were apparently far more perceptive than I'd given them credit for, and realized they'd been watching the dysfunction of our family for years without anyone explaining it to them. Your mom and I, we missed some important conversations when she was growing up. I was working a lot, and I didn't pay attention to things I should have paid attention to. Now we're trying to figure out how to have those conversations we should have had 20 years ago. Is that why Dad's in the hospital? Jake asked. Because of the stuff you and Mom are working out. The kid was 12 years old and had just made a connection that took me 74 years to understand. David's stress, his heart palpitations, the strain on their marriage, how much of it was because he'd been caught in the middle of our family's broken dynamics for 15 years. I think that might be part of it, I admitted. When families have problems, it affects everyone, even the people who aren't directly involved. Emma reached over and patted my hand with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. It's okay, Grandpa. Mum's been seeing a doctor to talk about feelings. Maybe you could see one too. Out of the mouths of babes. A 12-year-old had just suggested therapy more gently and effectively than any adult ever had. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of domestic chaos that I was completely unprepared for. I managed to get Jake to his dentist appointment, though I forgot his insurance card and had to text Rebecca 3 times for the information. I picked Emma up from school and listened to her practice violin, which sounded like cats being tortured, but which I praised enthusiastically anyway. By the time Rebecca called at 3 p.m., I was exhausted, covered in various food stains and completely out of my depth, but I was also happier than I'd been in months. How's David? I asked as soon as I heard her voice. He's going to be fine. They want to keep him overnight for observation, but his heart is healthy. The doctor says it's definitely stress-related. She paused. How are the kids? Alive and fed, which I'm counting as a victory, though I may have poisoned them with my cooking. I heard her laugh, actually laugh, for the first time in years. What did you make them? Grilled cheese sandwiches that were more charcoal than cheese, and mac and cheese from a box that somehow turned into soup. And they ate it? They did. Jake said it was interesting, which I think was his polite way of saying inedible. Another laugh. Dad, thank you, really. I know this wasn't easy. It was actually... I paused, trying to find the right words. It was the best day I've had in a long time. These kids are incredible, Rebecca. They're smart and funny and kind, and I feel like I've been missing out on knowing them. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Rebecca? You still there? I'm here. Her voice was softer now, thoughtful. Dad, would you like to have dinner with us this weekend? All of us, I mean. David should be home by then, and maybe we could actually have a conversation that doesn't end in disaster. The invitation felt like a gift I didn't deserve but desperately wanted. I would love that more than anything. Okay, Saturday at 6. And Dad? Maybe leave the cooking to me this time. After we hung up, I sat in Rebecca's kitchen surrounded by the evidence of my domestic disasters, and for the first time since Martha died, I felt like I might actually have a family again. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world where families are complicated and messy and worth fighting for, let me know in the comments. Sometimes the smallest breakthroughs feel like the biggest victories. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp October air that makes Colorado beautiful and my arthritis unbearable. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror at 5:30 p.m., adjusting my tie for the 4th time and wondering if a 74-year-old man could actually die from nervousness. I'd spent the entire week preparing for this dinner like it was a job interview. I'd practiced conversations in my truck, rehearsed apologies in the shower, and even bought a book about effective communication from the local bookstore. The earnest young clerk had looked at me with such pity when I'd explained I was trying to learn how to talk to my own daughter that I'd nearly walked out without buying anything. But here I was, wearing my best shirt and carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers that suddenly seemed pathetic in my shaking hands. David answered the door looking tired but healthy, with normal color back in his cheeks. The kids tackled me with hugs that nearly knocked me over. Apparently, our disaster-filled day together had bonded us in ways I hadn't expected. Grandpa Henry, Jake announced. I told everyone at school about your burnt grilled cheese. Mrs. Martinez said you sound like a fun grandpa. Fun wasn't exactly the word I'd have used, but I'd take it. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, wearing a simple blue dress that reminded me painfully of her mother. She'd done something different with her hair, and she looked younger, softer somehow. Hi, Dad. No hug, but her smile seemed genuine. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," I answered honestly and was surprised when she laughed. "Good. That means you're taking this seriously." Dinner was pot roast again, but this time the conversation flowed differently. David told us about his day in the hospital, making jokes about the terrible food and the night nurse who kept checking on him every 20 minutes. The kids chattered about school and friends and upcoming Halloween plans. I found myself actually participating instead of just observing. When Emma mentioned her upcoming violin recital, I asked about the piece she was playing. When Jake talked about his science project on volcanoes, I shared stories about the time Martha and I had visited Mount St. Helens. It felt almost normal, almost like a real family dinner, but I could see the tension in Rebecca's shoulders, the way she kept glancing at me like she was waiting for something. We were dancing around the real conversation we needed to have, and we all knew it. After the kids finished eating and disappeared into the living room to do homework, the three adults sat in awkward silence for a few moments. David looked between Rebecca and me like a referee waiting for a fight to break out. "I've been thinking about what you said," Rebecca finally said, her fingers tracing patterns on her napkin. "About wanting to do better, about learning how to be the father I deserved." My heart started pounding. "And I want to try, but I need you to understand some things first." She looked up at me with eyes that were both hopeful and guarded. "I need you to understand how deep this goes." "Okay," I said, though I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever she was about to tell me. "It's not just about Tommy Richardson. That was the worst thing, but it wasn't the only thing." She took a shaky breath. "Do you remember when I was 16 and I wanted to try out for the school play? I had a vague memory of Rebecca mentioning something about theater, but the details were fuzzy. Sort of, I got the lead role, Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. I was so excited I could barely contain myself. I came home that day bursting to tell you and Mom. A cold dread was starting to form in my stomach. But you were working late that night, again, and when you finally got home at 9 p.m., I was already in bed. Mom said she'd tell you, but..." Rebecca's voice trailed off. "But what?" "But the next morning you left for work before I woke up. And that night, you came home exhausted and went straight to your workshop. This went on for 3 days. 3 days of me waiting for you to say something, anything, about the biggest thing that had ever happened to me. I tried to remember, but that period of my life was a blur of long hours and financial stress. We'd been behind on the mortgage, and I'd been pulling every overtime shift I could get. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I cornered you in the garage and told you myself. Do you remember what you said?" I shook my head, afraid to hear the answer. "You said, 'That's nice, sweetheart, but try to keep the noise down during rehearsals. I need quiet when I get home from work.'" Her voice was steady, but tears were starting to form in her eyes. "You reduced the most important moment of my teenage life to a noise complaint." The memory came flooding back with horrible clarity. I'd been installing new shelving in the garage, frustrated because I'd measured wrong and had to start over. Rebecca had burst in, talking rapidly about something. I'd only caught fragments while I was focused on my project. "Rebecca, I quit the play the next day." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "I quit. I told the drama teacher I'd changed my mind. I couldn't bear the thought of performing in front of an audience that included you, knowing you saw it as nothing more than noise." David reached over and took her hand. I could see this was difficult for her, but she pressed on. "That's when I started to understand that I was never going to be important enough to get your full attention. Not Tommy Richardson, not school plays, not anything. You were always going to be somewhere else, thinking about something else. I wanted to defend myself, to explain about the financial pressures, the long hours, the constant worry about providing for my family. But the words felt hollow even before I spoke them. I spent my entire teenage years feeling invisible in my own house," Rebecca continued. "And then I spent my 20s in relationships with men who treated me the same way, because that's what I thought love looked like. Men who were emotionally unavailable, who put everything else before me, who made me feel like I was asking for too much when all I wanted was to be seen." She gestured toward David. "It took me 4 years of therapy before I could even recognize that David was different. 4 years to learn that asking someone to pay attention to you isn't being needy, it's being human." David squeezed her hand. "And it took another 3 years before she could believe I actually meant it, when I said she was the most important thing in my life." The weight of my failures was crushing. Every choice I'd made, thinking I was being a good provider, had actually been teaching my daughter that she didn't matter. "I spent 40 years believing I wasn't worth anyone's full attention," Rebecca said. "And then you show up with a jewelry box that represents hours and hours of focused, careful work. And all I could think was, where was this man when I needed him?" Where was this attention, this care, this dedication when I was 14 and being hurt, or 16 and achieving something wonderful, or 18 and leaving for college? I was crying now, tears streaming down my face without shame. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. I know you are, and I know you were doing what you thought was right. But Dad, I need you to understand, this isn't just about forgiveness. This is about learning how to have a relationship when one person spent 40 years believing they're not worth having a relationship with. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. In the living room, I could hear Emma practicing violin, the same piece she'd been working on all week, getting a little better each day. What do I do? I asked. How do I fix this? You can't fix it, Rebecca said gently. You can't go back and be there for the school play or protect me from Tommy Richardson or pay attention when I needed you to pay attention. That damage is done. My heart sank. But, she continued, you can choose to be different now. You can choose to really see me, really listen to me, really be present when we're together. You can choose to get to know your grandchildren instead of just showing up for major holidays. You can choose to be the father I need now instead of mourning the father I needed then. I want that, I said. More than anything, I want that. Then you're going to have to learn how to have uncomfortable conversations. You're going to have to sit with difficult emotions instead of disappearing into work or projects or anything else. You're going to have to show up, even when it's hard. Emma's violin practice stopped, and we could hear her calling from the living room. Mom, Grandpa Henry, come listen to this part. Rebecca looked at me with something that might have been hope. Starting with right now, my daughter wants to share something with us. We walked into the living room together, and Emma launched into the piece she'd been practicing. It was still rough around the edges, but I could hear the improvement from just a week ago. More importantly, I could see the concentration on her face, the pride in her posture. When she finished, she looked at us expectantly. That was beautiful, sweetheart, Rebecca said. You've been working so hard on that passage. Emma beamed and turned to me. What did you think, Grandpa? I looked at this 12-year-old girl who was my granddaughter, really seeing her maybe for the first time. Seeing her hope, her talent, her need for encouragement and recognition. I think, I said carefully, that was the most beautiful music I've ever heard, and I think you're going to be incredible at your recital. Her smile could have lit up the entire neighborhood. Rebecca caught my eye and nodded slightly. This was what she meant. This was how you showed up for someone. It was a start. 3 months later, I was sitting in the front row of Emma's middle school auditorium, watching my granddaughter play violin like her life depended on it. The piece was the same one she'd been practicing that night in Rebecca's living room, but now it flowed like water, each note clear and confident. I'd been to 4 of these recitals now, along with Jake's soccer games, school science fairs, and even a parent-teacher conference where Rebecca had asked me to come along as backup grandpa support. Each time I'd felt a little less like an outsider and a little more like family, but tonight was different. Tonight was the first time Rebecca had saved me a seat right next to her. When Emma finished her solo, the applause was thunderous. She found us in the audience and waved, her face glowing with pride and accomplishment. Rebecca grabbed my hand and squeezed it. She's incredible, I whispered. She gets that from her grandmother, Rebecca whispered back. Martha always said music was the language of the soul. It was the first time she'd mentioned her mother without pain clouding her voice. We'd been having a lot of firsts lately. After the recital, we all went out for ice cream, a new tradition that had started after Jake's last soccer game. The kids chatted about the performance, dissecting every moment with the serious analysis that only children can bring to these things. Grandpa Henry, did you see when Tommy Peterson messed up his part? Jake asked. Chocolate chip ice cream smeared across his chin. I felt so bad for him. I did see that, I said. But did you notice how he kept playing anyway? That takes real courage. Is that what you call resilience? Emma asked. We learned about that word in English class. Exactly. Sometimes the most important thing isn't playing perfectly, it's playing through the mistakes. Rebecca looked at me with raised eyebrows. That's very wise, Dad. I've been reading, I admitted. Books about parenting and grandparenting. Turns out there's a lot I didn't know. It was true. In the past 3 months, I'd devoured every book I could find about family relationships, emotional intelligence, and effective communication. I'd even started seeing Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the same therapist Rebecca had been working with for years. The first session had been brutal. Dr. Hernandez had asked me to describe my relationship with my own father, and I'd realized I was just repeating the same patterns of emotional distance and workaholic behavior that had defined my childhood. My father had provided for his family, but had never really been present for it, and I'd thought that was what being a good father meant. "I'm proud of you," Rebecca said, as we walked to our cars. "For doing the work. I know it's not easy. It's the hardest thing I've ever done," I admitted, "but also the most important." David loaded the kids into their car, while Rebecca and I stood in the parking lot under the glow of streetlights. It had become our tradition, these brief moments alone after family events where we could check in with each other without audience. "I have something I want to show you," she said, pulling out her phone. "I found this last week while I was cleaning out some old boxes." She handed me the phone, and I saw a photograph I'd forgotten existed. It was Rebecca at age 6, standing in our backyard next to Martha's rose garden. She was holding a tiny watering can and grinning at the camera, with a smile so wide it seemed to take up her entire face. "I remember this day," Rebecca said softly. "You had just gotten home from work, and instead of going straight to your workshop like usual, you came outside and helped me water the roses. You taught me how to check if the soil was dry enough, how to water slowly so the roots could drink it all up." I stared at the photograph, remembering that evening. It had been one of those rare days when work had ended early, when I'd felt caught up enough to actually spend time in the yard. "You told me that roses were like people. They needed attention and care to grow properly. And you said that someday when I was grown up, you'd teach me to plant my own garden." My throat tightened. "I never did that, did I?" "No, you didn't. But Dad," she took the phone back and looked at the picture again, "I want you to know that I held onto this memory for 40 years. Even when I was angriest at you, even when I felt most forgotten, I kept this one perfect afternoon in my heart. Why are you showing me this now?" She smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like that 6-year-old in the photograph. "Because I think I'm ready to plant that garden now, with you." The words hit me like a lightning bolt of pure joy. "Really? Really?" Spring planting season is still a few months away, but I was thinking, maybe you could help me plan it. We could start with roses like Mom grew, and maybe Emma and Jake could help too. I couldn't speak for a moment. The idea of working in the soil with my daughter and grandchildren, of creating something beautiful together, of finally fulfilling a promise I'd made 40 years ago, it felt like redemption, wrapped in topsoil and possibility. "I would love that more than anything in the world," I managed to say. "Good, because I already started looking at seed catalogs, and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing." We both laughed, and the sound echoed through the parking lot like music. David honked gently from their car, and Rebecca waved to let him know she was coming. "One more thing," she said. "The jewelry box. I put it on my dresser and I use it every day. It's exactly what I needed, Dad." It just took me a while to understand that. I watched her walk away, and for the first time in years I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The drive home was different that night. Instead of the usual silence filled with regret and self-recrimination, I found myself thinking about rose varieties and garden layouts. I thought about teaching Jake how to prepare soil and showing Emma how to plant seeds in neat rows. Most importantly, I thought about second chances and the incredible grace of a daughter who had chosen forgiveness over bitterness, growth over stagnation. When I got home, I didn't go straight to my workshop like I usually did. Instead, I sat in Martha's chair. I'd finally started thinking of it as our chair instead of just hers, and called Rebecca. "Did you forget something?" she answered, but I could hear the smile in her voice. "I just wanted to say thank you for giving me another chance, for letting me be part of your family again. Dad, you were always part of the family. We just had to figure out how to be one together." After we hung up, I went to my workshop and pulled out a piece of paper. At the top, I wrote Garden Planning, Spring 2026, and underneath, I started making a list of everything I needed to learn about soil preparation, plant spacing, and growing seasons. But first I wrote something else. Ask Rebecca what her favorite flowers are, because this time I was going to pay attention. This time I was going to show up. This time I was going to be the father and grandfather my family deserved. It had taken me 74 years to learn the most important lesson of my life. Love isn't just about providing for people or making beautiful things for them. Love is about presence. Love is about attention. Love is about choosing again and again to really see the people who matter most. Outside my workshop window, the November wind was rattling the bare branches of the old oak tree in my backyard. Spring felt impossibly far away, but I could already imagine it. Warm soil, fresh seeds, and the sound of my grandchildren's laughter as we planted something beautiful together. Some stories end with dramatic reconciliations and tearful embraces. Ours ended with garden catalogs and the quiet promise of work to be done together. But sometimes the most profound healing happens not in grand gestures, but in the simple decision to keep showing up, one day at a time. The jewelry box that had started this whole journey now sat on Rebecca's dresser, holding her earrings and bracelets and all the small treasures that make up a life. But more than that, it held the possibility of all the conversations we still needed to have, all the memories we still needed to make, and all the love we were finally learning how to share. If you've made it this far with me through this story of broken families and second chances, I hope you'll take a moment to tell me in the comments what part touched your heart the most. Because sometimes, when we share our stories of pain and healing, we help each other believe that change is possible, no matter how old we are or how much time we think we've wasted. Every family has its own season for planting. Ours was just beginning,